clearly your father was a huge influence upon your
Totally,
life.
totally.
Musically and in literature.
In every way.
Tell us more about him.
A quiet gentleman. Everybody in the local neighborhood knew him and respected him. You know, if somebody would get a piece of muck in their eye, they couldn't get it, you know, go and see Ben, he'll help you get it out. Things like just silly things. But anyway, subsequently he told me that when he finally escaped the terrors of the First World War, he said to himself, if ever I have children, there are two things, boys, that they're not going to do. They're not going down a coal mine, and they're not going in the army. So I was brought up by my father as a pacifist, which I've kept all my life. And this is why it relates to you and me and this music, is that when the Suez crisis happened, I registered as a conscientious objector when I was 18. The only way I could protest that particular silliness of international governments was to cancel my deferment. And of course, within 2 or 3 weeks, I got a letter calling me to Leeds for. So I went to court in Leeds. They found me very sincere, but you know, you better get yourself a job as an ambulance, this or that. And I said, no, that's not the alternative. And then I had an appeal court in Manchester, and same story. Blah, blah, blah. This is to finish that bit of the story. I was then called to the local police station in Bangor. This little old man, probably in his 60s, spoke. He said, good morning, when I went in. And so I could tell he was Welsh, so I borrowed out. He said, Rachi. So we talked for a while. And then he said in Welsh, he said, Bachan, you know what's going to happen to you? I said, yes, I know. I'm going to have to spend some time. And I never heard another thing. I am confident that when I left that door, he got out his shredder or a pair of scissors, and my thing went in the bin. Because at that time, the nationalist feeling in Wales was more pacifistic than it was aggressive. But the final connection, and I'll shut up now, was that one person who was particularly helpful was Michael Tippett. Michael was marvellous with me that day. He said, if you want letters, if you want me to testify for you, if you want me to, I'll be there. And he was fantastic.
Michael was a wonderful man.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
Did you know about Britain's pacifism as well?
Oh, sure, sure, but I didn't know him in the same way that I knew Michael. And musically, I was more drawn to Michael's music because of its. Oh, there's a kind of complexity and challenge about it that, you know, makes you listen. Britain was, you know, it's lovely and all the rest of it. Afternoon tea on the tennis court, but that wasn't part of my thing. I've come to realise, of course, that Britain's phenomenon. Music is so marvellous, particularly for the voice. And, yeah.
The Sinfonia de Requiem still gets me every time I hear it. I think it's an extraordinary work.
No question.
So now we come to post-university.
Well, connected to the university, yeah.
And this extraordinary time where you studied both at Darmstadt and in Italy with Luigi Dallapiccola, Luciano Berio, and Roman Vlad. Talk about these times, because these are extraordinary people that clearly had an important influence upon you as a composer.
You know, the saying that you have to be in the right place at the right time to get any traction is certainly true. My teacher in Bangor in the last, when I was a master's student, 2 years master's degree, was Reginald Smith Brindle, who had studied with Dallapiccola and had married an Italian that lived in Florence, in Firenze, for a number of years. So he, after one lesson, he said, I was getting ready to graduate. And he said, what plans do you have? And I said, well, you know, I'd like to keep doing what I'm doing. And he said, well, I have an idea. I think I will write to Dallapiccola and see if he will take you as a student, and I'll recommend you. And Dallapiccola was teaching in New York at the time, so I had to wait for him to come back to Italy. Excuse me. And that's when I spent 6 or 7 months with Roman Vlad in Rome first, and then moved to Florence, Firenze, when Dallapiccola came back. Yeah. Did you ever know him at all, William Dallapiccola?
No, never met him.
5'6", you know, man. Somewhat pedantic, or punctilious probably is more. Even his Italian was a little archaic. So that, for example, my lesson was I was his last student on a Friday afternoon. So my lesson was at 4:45. Now, normally we'd say alle 5:15. Dallapiccola, alle 4:75. So 4 3/4, he'd be here 3/4. Anyway, so I would show up for my lessons. He was, again, a Renaissance man, incredible knowledge of literature. A lot of the time that I spent with him, we talked about Dante and Homer and James Joyce and Thomas Mann and so on. And he was happy that I love literature and we could exchange. And sometimes it would get very close to the end of the lesson. I would think, well, are you going to take a look at what I've been doing? But then he would say, it got to 6 o'clock. Allora, andiamo in cucina, prendiamo un bicchiere di vino, we'd go to the kitchen, have a glass of wine. And then we'd talk about music and so on, about the piece. One day, I arrived alle 4:75. And he opened the door, and I could see something had animated him. He was almost jumping up and down. So he said, vieni. Somebody had sent him a recording made, I think, from an old cylinder of Busoni playing La Campanella. We spent the whole lesson listening to this and analysing it. It was marvellous. I mean, I don't know about others, but maybe some would have thought this is a complete waste of my time. And probably today some of the young composers would think, don't give me all that crap, I need to know. No, it was fascinating. I mean, I couldn't stop watching his face, and you know, it was so beautiful. And that was the kind of, again, cultural relationship I had with him, that it wasn't just about what I was doing. You know, he was always he would show me what he was working on, and he like his archaic language, he had a jar full of pencils. I swear to God, if you had a dartboard and threw them, they'd all stick in. They were sharpened to the point. If you look at his manuscripts, they're absolutely gorgeous. I mean, nobody should ever put those on a computer. Just many of them are still published that way. You know, everything, it mattered to him that this was what it was. So again, the correlation between composing and making sure that the signs and symbols that you need as a cellist are exactly what you want. And you don't have to stand up and ask questions, you know, is it this or that? It's obvious in the music. And when you listen to his vocal music, you can tell that the breath is in the right, the diaphragm is right. It's like that, you know. And he once said to me, he said, you know, Bernard, we're supposed to be in a contrapuntal time post-Schoenberg. And he said, we are to some extent. But he said, nobody has proved to me yet that we can't manage without, that we can manage without harmony. It's just a simple, but such a profound statement. In other words, leading tone, and then I think back to my 16th century studies, and you know, it's all, of course, and it is to this day. It is to this day. I've had singers somewhat nervous about taking on a work of mine for premiere performance. I said, well, where will I get my pictures? And I said to them, there's no way you can miss them. I'm not giving. You'll hear them. You'll hear them through your feet if you're with an orchestra. They'll be right there. After the first, they say, "Oh, it's so easy." Well, of course. Why should you have sweaty palms for 20 minutes while, try and find out? It's my job to get you to sing instrumentally. A horn player waiting to come in with and those things, I think, were enlarged upon by Berio, who was also meticulous. I mean, he was always in a hurry. Luciano, deadline after deadline, and I could show you little bits of pieces of music that were not by Luciano Berio, because I did a lot of his copying, and when I lived in his house, he said, "Bernard, you know what goes here, it's obvious." Anyway, so.
In some of the sequences?
No, this was in orchestra pieces. No, the sequences were, but it's okay. The history of art is not just the history of individual artists. If you go down in the tombs in Egypt, I mean, one man didn't paint all those. They had a team of them, a little oil lamp. And subsequently, all the great sculptors had always had assistants who were polishing and scrubbing and doing this.
So were you working with Dallapiccola and Berio simultaneously?
No. Berio studied with Dallapiccola, but do you know where he studied with him? In Tanglewood. Dallapiccola was in Tanglewood, 1960. Berio, 58, went there and studied with Dallapiccola. And then Berio went back 1960 with Circles. That was his piece that was commissioned for that year. Yeah. No, but it's interesting you asked the question, William, because at the end of my time with Dallapiccola, he said, what plans do you have? Echoing what Brindle had said to me. And I'd already been in touch with Luciano, who was in the States, in California. I said, if it's possible, I'd like to, spend some time with Luciano Berio. He said, that's absolutely the right choice. Absolutely the right choice for you. And it turned out to be, yeah.
So talk about the times with Berio and the lessons.
Well, 1962, he and Maderna, Nono, were brought to Dartington by William Glock, the whole Italian mafia. And I waited. I'd been in touch with Berio, and so I introduced myself. He said, "Yeah, it's fine. I'm now going back to Italy, and come along, and we'll go from there." And in a sense, I was kind of an apprentice. There weren't specific lesson times. I lived in his house part of the time in Milano, and then he had this place in Liguria, near where he was born, and spent the whole summer of '62 from the end of Dartington right through to the end of September. And I was just working, and he was working in the upstairs room. And at the end of the day, we'd talk about, I'd take a look and so on. Or later on, he would say, "Look, I need a transcription of this into a different key, so that it'll fit Kathy's voice. Would you do it for me?" And yeah. And or the night before, I'd see him cozying up to some pretty young lady, and then he was gone. And the next morning, a phone call with a croaky voice: "Bernard, can you do the rehearsal for me? Fammi la prova, per favore." So, yeah, sure. I want to stay where you are. wonderful experience to me. So I was working with a lot of the people who were actually part of Boulese's ensemble. Francis Pierre, the harpist, and Severino Gazzalone, the flutist, and sure.
I've forgotten that Dartington was such a hothouse under Glock's time. Because of the people that he brought there.
He brought there, and then he edited the magazine, which was high-level critical thought about music. I mean, not gobbledygook and equations and numbers, but just clear thinking, philosophical thinking about the history of music and the place of contemporary music in the spectrum. Yeah, he was a remarkable man. Remarkable.
So what did the summer consist of at Dartington? What was a typical day at Dartington?
At Dartington?
Yes.
Well, you know, it's essentially devoted to amateur musicians who would come there on a kind of 2-week vacation and, you know, play chamber music, coached by some of the finest players. Hans Keller was an ever-present, and his wife, who was an artist, was always there. And he was always challenging people in his particular way. I mean, you knew Hans, I'm sure.
I only met him once.
Yeah, he's a very Teutonic mind, but a fine one. So, and then in the evenings there would be concerts, and the programs would be mixed between the repertoire, string quartets or whatever, lead songs, and new pieces. And Harry, Birtwhistle, Mike Davis, Sandiger, Richard Rodney Bennett, we were all there at one time or another and participated in those, coaching the musicians to play our music and other 20th century pieces. Yeah. And in a gorgeous setting. I mean, it's a beautiful.
And did Berio and Dallapiccola comment on the music as it was being rehearsed prior to performances? Were they making suggestions? What was their input to the composers?
None from Dallapiccola in that sense, because I left Italy and I mean, I've conducted his music since, but not at that particular time. Berio, yeah, he would comment, because I did a lot of quite a few rehearsals of circles for him, and as you know, some of that notation is aleatory, and he stubbornly refused to put any directions for performance in the score. I challenged him several times about that. I said, you know, it would help these musicians if it's not obvious, they shouldn't be playing it. So, there was a side to him that was a little bit testy like that. But yeah, and so I toured with him around in Europe, and Germany and France, and also to the BBC in London, and yeah. And he conducted. He wasn't a great conductor by any means, but his musical intentions were, I think, always very solid.
So the one person that you haven't mentioned is Roman Vlad.
Well, that was a brief period. It was about 6 or 7 months. I had weekly lessons with him at his home in Rome. Fine pianist, multi-linguist. I mean, just I don't know how many languages. I think it was 10 that he was pretty fluent in. And I would just take my music and play it, and we would talk about it. And I think somewhat like Dallapiccola and Berio, it was not just that, but a larger context of what it is to be a composer, and why this as opposed to that, and what kind of lineage I was allied to. which is still important for me because there's no. Just trying to think of the name of the American composer who said all composers, irrespective of documents and nationality, are either French or German. And it's a kind of glib remark on one sense, and yet there's a grain of truth in it. And I know where I'm very French. Debussy for me is the master, father of new music, much more than Schoenberg, which is not to diminish in any way what Schoenberg's genius was about. But for me, Debussy and Ravel